Happy Thursday, everybody. Oh, actually, one sec. That's much better. So let me tell you a little story about my coworker, George. George is 18, he's still a student, and he says to me that he actually has some money saved, which is pretty surprising for a young man his age. A couple weeks ago, we went and met at A&W after work, and wanted to talk a little bit about finances. Because being 18 and having a bit of savings money is the perfect financial situation you want to be in for building a successful financial future. So at A&W, we whipped out a napkin, which in this case is going to be a whiteboard because we have the technology. And then I drew two rectangles divided into two and labeled them income, expenses, assets, and liabilities. I then told him that this was an explanation put together by one of those guru kind of guys. His name's Robert Kiyosaki. So I wanted to explain to George the different ways that cash flow can work. And so I started off with the first case of someone who is essentially poor or living paycheck to paycheck and struggling to get by. So the way this would work, I told George, is that the person would get their paycheck from their job, and then that essentially goes right out through their expenses. So this would be the kind of person who is unable to get anywhere financially and would be toast if they lost their job for whatever reason, which is so common these days. So the next thing I showed George is what Robert Kiyosaki calls the rat race, which is what we find much of the middle class in today. If you're not sure what the rat race is, I have a video posted down below that will scarily show you exactly what it is. So I say, George, right now you have it easy. Your expenses are low because you're living at home. You don't have to worry about groceries or anything like that. But maybe soon you want to move out. And then your expenses are going to increase. And this leaves you with two options. You can increase your income, which is possible because you're young. You could be finding a better job, earning more money, different things like that. Or you could be just spending less, which isn't so hard to do with good habits. So George, a few years after that, maybe you land a great job where you're making quite a bit of money, and you realize, I want to start a family and have a house and buy a car and all these different nice things that are what we're supposed to be looking for in the future, right? Well, all of a sudden you start adding all of these things onto your lifestyle and your expenses go up and up and up and up. And then you have two options. You can either earn more money or you can try and spend less. Well, all of a sudden, that's not so easy because you're excelling at the top of your career potentially, and you're working a full-time job already, and maybe your significant other is as well, but you still have to pay for your mortgage. You still have to pay for your phone bills. You still have to pay car loans, all of these other kinds of things. And you're stuck in the rat race, where you can never really get ahead. But Austin, George says to me, I was told that buying a house is a good thing. It's a good asset. Well, not necessarily. Let's just take a quick second to talk about what's the difference between an asset and a liability. And to make it the most simple possible explanation, an asset is something that increases your income, and a liability is something that decreases your income. For example, if you buy a car and drive it off the lot, you've instantly lost value on that car. So that is essentially a liability. Even if it helps you get to work or helps you with your day-to-day errands, financially it is a liability. Whereas something like an RRSP, if you put your money into it, then it will make you more money over the long term, so it is an asset. When you buy the house, you don't really own it until you've paid off your mortgage. At that point, until you've made your last mortgage payment, the bank owns your house. And then once you do own it, there's still your day-to-day bills that you have to pay, the time it takes to clean it, the expenses for repairs, all of these other costs that go into owning your own house. And although maybe the value is going up even when you own it, there's still no direct income coming from it. As opposed to if you were buying a house that you were renting to somebody, then you have direct income coming in, and that makes it an asset, absolutely. So what does this look like on the chart? The middle class cash flow system works just the same essentially as the paycheck to paycheck cash flow system. Even though you're making more money, rather than it being spent on expenses, it's spent on liabilities, which means you're increasing your debt as well. And when the debt has to be collected, your expenses go right up just alongside your income. So essentially, it's just a more dynamic version of living paycheck to paycheck. So then George asks me, well, how do I not get stuck in the rat race? Well, there is an answer for that. So this is where assets come in. So I tell George this situation. Let's say George earns $30,000 a year and his expenses are $18,000 a year. So he's able to save $12,000 a year, and he invests that at 5% or figures out a way to get 5% earnings every year. And I'm keeping this very simple just for understanding's sake. Well, by year 20, so George would be 38, he would have saved or invested $240,000, which means his interest on that would be $18,323 for the year, which is amazing because all of a sudden his expenses are now less than the amount that he's making from his assets. So by definition, in this situation, George would be considered wealthy. And he wouldn't be reliant just on the $30,000 of income to pay for his expenses. And eventually, maybe in the years down the road, you could be buying a house and not even really be paying for it because the income from your assets could be paying off your mortgage for you. Now for the wealth building cash flow, you would have your money coming in and then you would invest that, which I will eventually go into detail in future videos, which the main difference here is they give you more income. And then from your income, then you would spend that on liabilities, which would come out of your expenses. So essentially, you're building more wealth and having two income streams because you're making your money and then you're having your money make you money, which helps you pay your bills and can help you build wealth the longer you let it accumulate. And how retirement would work would be that this whole section gets erased, but you still have money coming in, even though you're not necessarily working. So my friends, that's the story of my friend George. And I think there's some valuable things you can learn from this. Right now, or maybe in the near future, you take a look at trying to understand how your cash flow works. Are you in the first situation where you're paycheck to paycheck? Are you potentially going to buy a house, or maybe you just bought a house and worried that you're going to get stuck in the rat race? Or if you have the ability to, could you possibly start buying assets or start building your wealth in a way that's going to help you retire in the future comfortably? To get started on this, I would just have a look at how much money do you have coming in and figure out where is it all going, which is essentially budgeting, which I'll start talking about next week. And secondly, I think it would be worth considering, what are my financial goals in the future? Because once you have these goals, or I like to think of them as targets, then you can start managing your money and your cash flow in a way that's going to help you achieve these targets. But with that, I'll see you next Tuesday.